Have you ever poured your whole life into someone only for them to treat you like a leftover plate of food they forgot to throw out? This isn't just a revenge story. It's a story about what happens when a quiet mother remembers exactly who she is and what she built, long after everyone else had decided she was irrelevant. I never thought I'd be one of those mothers who ends up living in her son's house, silently folding laundry that no one thanks her for. But life has a way of changing course when you're not looking. One day, you're the woman keeping a family afloat on a teacher's salary, juggling bills, piano recitals, and dinners with too much starch. The next, you're a widow with more memories than people who want to hear them. When Richard passed, I stayed in the house for 2 more years. The hardwood floors still carried the creak of his footsteps, and every corner whispered his name. But the silence grew heavier than I could carry. Mark, my only child, called one evening and said, "Mom, maybe it's time you came here. You shouldn't be alone like this." He had that warm voice he used when he was little and scared of the thunder. I resisted at first. My home was modest, but it was mine, built on coupon savings, secondhand furniture, and 38 years of marriage. But Mark was right. I was lonely, so I sold the house. I gave him $150,000 in cash, told him it was his to build a life with. He'd just had a second baby, and the apartment was getting tight. He looked stunned when I handed him the check. "You don't have to," he said. I smiled and replied, "That's the thing about love. It gives, even when no one asks." What I didn't tell him was that I also co-signed the loan for their new house. His credit wasn't enough on its own. I signed the papers quietly, like I do everything else. His wife, Janice, sent a short thank you text. I didn't expect more. They moved into a 2-story home in a suburban cul-de-sac. There was a lemon tree in the yard, and I planted basil and rosemary near the kitchen window, just like I used to. Mark set up a guest room for me upstairs, painted it pale yellow. "It's your space," he said. I believed him. For the first few months, I was almost happy. I picked the kids up from daycare, cooked, cleaned, organized closets, and clipped coupons like it was still 1985. I didn't ask for anything in return. No money, no title on the house, not even a thank you, though I would have appreciated one now and then. I simply wanted to matter in some quiet, useful way. Some nights, Mark would come home stressed and tired, throw his briefcase down, kiss the kids, and barely nod in my direction. Janice stopped eating dinner with us. Claiming her yoga schedule didn't allow for carbs after 5 p.m., I started leaving her plate in the microwave anyway, just in case she changed her mind. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that modern life made people less warm, less considerate. I told myself not to expect too much, that I'd already been given more than most mothers got. But slowly, I started to feel the walls of the house press inward. Mark began calling my cooking too rich, told me to keep the spices to a minimum for the kids' stomachs. Janice didn't like clutter, so my books disappeared from the shared shelves. My framed photo of Richard was replaced with an abstract canvas for aesthetic balance. At first, I laughed it off, but the space I was allowed to occupy got smaller by the week. I stopped playing music in the mornings, stopped inviting old friends over for tea. One day, I overheard Mark telling the kids, "Grandma's just old-fashioned. She likes to keep busy," as if I were some overzealous houseplant that needed pruning. Still, I told myself I was lucky. I had a roof over my head. I saw my grandchildren every day. I had purpose. And maybe, just maybe, they appreciated me in ways they didn't know how to show. Then came the day Janice mentioned downsizing to her friend on speakerphone while I folded towels in the hallway. "She's always here," she said flatly, "like furniture that talks." That line, it sank deeper than anything else had before. I didn't say a word. I didn't slam the door or cry into my pillow. Instead, I walked down to the basement, opened my old filing box, and pulled out a thin envelope marked "Private, Do Not Discard." Inside was the signed, notarized copy of the private loan agreement Mark and I made when I gave him the $150,000, and stapled to it, my co-signer agreement for the house mortgage. I stared at it for a long time. They had no idea that I had kept everything. They thought I had just gifted them a new life. But I had written protection into the very deal they thought was charity, not out of mistrust, but out of instinct, a mother's instinct, the kind that loves fully, but never forgets who built what and who owes whom. Mark started referring to the living room as his space. It happened slowly, so subtly I almost didn't catch it. At first, it was just a comment. "Mom, can you keep your knitting basket in your room? We're trying to go minimalist in the living area." I didn't argue. I picked it up and nodded. Then it was, "Don't water the basil too much. Janice says the kitchen smells like dirt." So I stopped watering. The basil died. I bought fake plants. I adjusted, like I always had. But the thing about adjusting too much, eventually, there's nothing left of you in the room you used to fill. One Saturday afternoon, Mark and Janice hosted a brunch for some of their friends from his office. I stayed in the background like I was supposed to. I wore a soft blue sweater, baked my lemon poppy seed muffins, and kept my voice low. I came out to offer the muffins with a smile, just like I used to do when Mark was a boy and brought home friends from school. Janice took one, smiled tightly, and said, "Thanks, you can leave them on the table." Then she turned back to the conversation without even a second glance. One of the younger women asked, "Oh, who made these? They're delicious." Mark chuckled. "My mom, she lives with us, kind of like a built-in support." "Like live-in help?" the woman asked. And then Mark said it. "Yeah, something like that. She's retired, keeps busy, it works out." They laughed, lightly. No one meant to be cruel, but I wasn't laughing. I stood there for half a second too long, holding the plate like a waitress who forgot to exit stage left. Then I turned and walked back to the kitchen, my face calm, my hands trembling. I didn't say a word, not even when Janice later told me to just take a break and rest after cleaning up brunch for 12 people. That night, I scrubbed the kitchen counters so hard my knuckles turned red. I wasn't angry, yet. I wasn't broken, yet. But I was starting to keep score. You know, I wonder sometimes if this part hits hardest for women like you, women who've spent years being the glue, the hands that hold everything together, the quiet force behind the family. Have you ever been reduced to a task list? Folded into the background so much that even your name becomes optional? If you've ever felt invisible in the house you built, just know you're not alone. I see you. And more importantly, you still matter. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of boiling garlic in the kitchen. It was how I used to cook for Richard. Low, slow, letting the house fill with warmth and memory. Janice came in and wrinkled her nose. "Can we not cook things that make the house smell like a food truck?" she said. I laughed gently, thinking she was teasing, but she wasn't. She lit a citrus-scented candle and opened all the windows, muttering under her breath. Mark said nothing. That night, Janice posted an Instagram story of the kitchen, captioned, "Trying to detox the house after another vintage cooking moment." I wasn't tagged, but I saw it. Even the basil plant made it into the shot, dead and browning on the sill. A few days later, I accidentally knocked over a glass while reaching for a mug. It shattered on the floor. I bent to pick it up, just as Mark walked in. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't look concerned. He stared at the shards and said coldly, "Mom, this is getting to be too much." "What is?" I asked softly. "Everything. The messes, the stress, the energy." I straightened my back, glass in my hand. "Mark, I've cleaned every room in this house. I make your children's lunches. I don't ask for anything." He rolled his eyes. "That's the thing. You act like it's a gift, but it's not. It's just maintenance, like background noise. You're here all the time. It's exhausting." I froze. "Are you saying you don't want me here anymore?" He hesitated, then said the words that scorched. "I think it's time you start thinking about other options. Maybe assisted living or moving out. You've had a good run here, but we need the space. The kids are growing. It's getting tight. I opened my mouth, closed it again. He looked away. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, the one I used to think of as mine. Now it just felt borrowed. A borrowed room in a borrowed life. My photograph of Richard had been moved to the dresser drawer. Janice said it didn't match the palette. I pulled it out that night and looked at his smile. Then I opened the drawer beneath it and pulled out the loan document, signed, notarized, unbreakable. They thought I gave them a gift. What they didn't know was I had only lent it. And the interest? Well, that was about to be collected. It didn't happen with a scream, not with a slammed door or broken plates. It happened in a quiet kitchen, over spilled milk and bruised silence. That's the thing about being erased. It rarely feels dramatic when it's happening. It's slow, dull, soft-edged, like watching fog roll in over everything you once recognized as home. The night after Mark told me to think about other options, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the dishwasher downstairs. I thought maybe he'd say something the next morning, a softened tone, an apology wrapped in logic. But when he passed me in the hallway, he just nodded, like nothing happened. Later that week, Janice hosted a wine night with her friends. I wasn't invited, of course, but I helped anyway. I made little cucumber sandwiches and lemon scones, just like I used to for Richard's faculty mixers. As they laughed in the living room, I stayed back in the kitchen, wiping the same clean countertop again and again. That's when I heard it. Through the half-open doorway, between sips of Pinot Grigio and shallow gossip, Janice said, "She's still here. I mean, I love helping our elders, but it's not a charity." Someone asked, "She doesn't pay rent?" Janice laughed. "She paid once, years ago. Mark says it was a gift, but now she's just around. Always, like a background character." The room chuckled. Uncomfortable, dismissive. And just like that, decades of sacrifice were boiled down to a punchline over cheese and crackers. I stood there frozen, one hand on the sponge, the other gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. But that night, I didn't wash their wine glasses either. I left them stacked in the sink like broken promises. The next morning, I found my garden pots gone from the back patio, the rosemary, the mint, the little tomato vine I had coaxed through spring. Gone. I found them piled behind the trash bins, roots exposed, pots cracked. Mark said nothing. Janice simply shrugged and said, "We needed more space for the kids' splash pool. You understand?" I nodded, because what else was there to do? The worst part wasn't being insulted. It was being edited out, one small piece at a time, until I was just maintenance. Free childcare, free labor. A moving figure in the background. At dinner, they spoke over me. At family events, I wasn't introduced anymore. At school, drop-off, the kids' teachers didn't know my name. They just called me the helper. Even my photo was taken down from the hallway. I found it in a drawer under batteries and expired coupons. The frame cracked. I used to believe silence was grace, but now it felt like cement shoes in deep water. One evening, I went downstairs to warm some milk. It was late. Mark and Janice were in the living room, unaware I was nearby. I heard my name, or at least, my role. "She's draining me," Janice said. Mark muttered something I couldn't hear. "No," she continued. "I'm serious. She's like emotional clutter, just there." He sighed. "I know. I've been thinking the same. She doesn't do anything. She just exists. Exists." I stood in the shadows with the fridge light spilling behind me, the carton of milk still in my hand, my throat tight, my ears burning. That word circled in my chest like smoke. Just exists. No one said, "She raised me." No one said, "She gave me the down payment." No one said, "She gave up everything to be here." No, just, she exists. Back in my room, I sat on the bed and opened the box beneath it. The envelope was still there. Loan contract, notarized, with dates and signatures. It was like holding a secret sword I'd buried long ago. At the time, I drafted it just to feel secure. not to threaten, not to use, but now it was the only thing in that house that still said I mattered, that I hadn't just existed, that I had built the very foundation they walked on barefoot and entitled. I stayed 2 more weeks after that. Outwardly, I was the same. Quiet, helpful, present. But inside, I was packing memories, packing facts, packing the last shreds of hope into something hard and final. On a rainy Wednesday, I overheard Mark on the phone with someone. We're hoping to refinance soon. Maybe tap some equity. I stopped mid-step. Refinance? Tap what equity? The house? The house I helped fund? The one I co-signed for? My pulse quickened. I walked back to my room and closed the door gently, sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to myself, "You're not a ghost. You're a co-owner." There are many kinds of grief, the kind you feel when someone dies, and the kind that comes when someone you love starts pretending you're already gone. What they didn't know, what they'd never imagined, was that while they were trying to erase me, I was already preparing my return. Not loud, not cruel, just real. Because if I had become invisible in their home, then I'd make sure they felt my absence in ways that mattered most. It was a Thursday morning when the final piece clicked into place. Janice was standing at the kitchen island with a sleek folder in her hands and that sharp, sugar-coated tone she always used when asking for something she knew I wouldn't like. "Joanne, could you come here for a moment? Mark and I were just talking." I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked over. She opened the folder with a manicured finger and slid a few pages toward me. "It's just some paperwork, bank stuff. Nothing changes, really. You'd still be here, of course. We just need your signature so we can refinance the house." I looked down, my name, typed neatly, nestled in between phrases like equity transfer and primary borrower reassignment. It wasn't just a form, it was an erasure, written in polite fonts and legalese. I looked up at her and said quietly, "No." She blinked. "Sorry?" I said, "No, Janice." Her lips twitched. She forced a tight smile. "You don't understand. This is just to streamline things. You're still family. You'll still be here." I shook my head. "No, I won't sign. The house isn't yours to borrow against." Mark walked in then, holding his coffee like he hadn't just handed me a pen to disappear myself. "Mom, why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" I turned to him. "This house is partially mine. You couldn't afford it without my loan and my co-signature." His mouth twitched, but he stayed calm. "It was a gift." "No," I said, my voice steady. "It was a loan. I have the contract. The bank does too." That was the moment I saw it. His face tightened, just slightly. A flicker of doubt. He didn't remember the terms. He'd assumed over the years that I'd forgotten too, that my silence meant surrender, that being a mother meant being endlessly forgiving, even to the point of being legally erased. But I hadn't forgotten. I had kept everything. That night, I pulled out the documents again, laid them across my small desk like a deck of cards. Deed copies, the notarized agreement, mortgage details, interest clauses. The paper trail of every dollar I gave, every promise I never asked to be repaid until now. I called Walter, the family lawyer, my late husband's best friend. His voice crackled on speaker. "Joanne, it's been a while. What's going on?" I think," I said, "it's time to stop pretending I'm just visiting." There was a pause, then a sigh of understanding. "You ready to take your name back?" "I'm ready," I said, "and I need your help doing it quietly." 2 days later, I sat in Walter's office. It smelled like cedar and paper and dignity. He flipped through the documents. "You have every legal right to call this loan due. If they can't pay, the bank will trigger the clause. They'll be forced to sell or face foreclosure." He glanced at me. "You sure you want to go through with it?" I thought of the basil thrown in the trash, the glass I broke and got scolded for, the word emotional clutter. I nodded. I've spent years giving away pieces of myself. This is the first thing I'm taking back. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not out of guilt, but out of strange calm. There was a quiet thunder in my chest, like something long buried had started waking up. The next morning, I brewed my coffee and watched Janice and Mark pack the kids into the SUV. They didn't say goodbye. They never did anymore. I didn't need them to, because this time, I wasn't waiting for permission to matter. The official letter from the bank arrived 1 week later. It was addressed to Mark and Janice. It stated, in very clean language, that the co-signer of the mortgage had exercised her right to call the loan due. The outstanding balance needed to be resolved within 30 days, or the property would be put under lien. Mark's voice when he read it was tight. Janice's was sharper. "She can't do this." "She did," Mark muttered. I stayed in my room, reading the newspaper. I didn't eavesdrop. I didn't need to. That weekend, Mark knocked on my door. "Mom, we need to talk." I opened it. I already did all my talking with the bank. He looked stunned, like he still couldn't believe I had acted. "Why would you do this? After everything?" "After everything," I echoed. "Exactly. After everything I gave." He didn't speak. He just stared. "I gave you my savings, my home, my time, my hands, my name, and in return, you gave me silence, disrespect, disappearance. Mom, we're family." I smiled softly. "Then maybe you should have acted like it." I closed the door, not with anger, but with finality. That night, I walked out to the garden for one last look. The patio lights hummed. The grass was too short. The mint was gone. But I stood there barefoot, letting the earth remember me one more time. I had made this life possible. They'd forgotten that. But I hadn't. And now they were going to feel it, in the only language they had ever really listened to. Not guilt. Consequence. I left before sunrise, not out of fear, not out of shame, but because quiet things like dignity, like freedom, move best in the early hours. The house was still. I didn't pack much. A small suitcase, a few changes of clothes, my wedding ring, and the envelope that had started it all. The contract that proved I was never just the help. I left a note on the counter, simple, unemotional, honest. "Mark, Janice, I'm not angry, but I'm finished. The time for asking to belong has passed. Please don't look for me." I folded the note under the edge of the teapot no one ever used. Then I slipped out the back door, walked down the street, and didn't look back. Walter had helped me make arrangements. The real estate listing for the house went live that same morning. Mark and Janice hadn't yet realized that if they couldn't repay the called loan, the bank wouldn't wait. They had 30 days, and I wasn't going to use one more of them living under their roof. The apartment I moved into was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom in an older building downtown. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew this was mine. The light came in soft through the curtains. The kitchen was small, but the windowsill was perfect for herbs. I placed a basil plant there that first day, watered it gently. No one would throw it away this time. I didn't call Mark, didn't reply to his messages, didn't respond when Janice left a voicemail titled Urgent. What was there to say? They had erased me from their lives in every way that counted, except legally. Now they were discovering what erasing someone who still holds the pen feels like. 3 offers came in on the house within the first week. The market was strong, and the neighborhood was popular. I chose the buyer carefully, a divorced woman in her 50s starting over after 20 years of being someone's afterthought. Her name was Lorraine. She toured the house and said, "I can see myself healing here." That's all I needed to hear. Walter handled the legal side. I signed everything with a steady hand, no emotion, no hesitation, and just like that, the house that had become a stage for my humiliation was no longer theirs. It was sold. It was done. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I didn't post anything on Facebook. I went to the grocery store and bought myself a small lemon cake and a tin of Earl Grey. Back home, I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the balcony as the city breathed around me. I watched the steam rise from the mug and felt something I hadn't in years: rest. Mark called 11 times the day they received the eviction notice from the new owner. He left one voicemail. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't just sell the house. We live here." But of course, I could, and I had. I listened to the message once, then deleted it. That night, I found an old photo album in the bottom of my suitcase. Richard smiling in the garden, Mark at his 5th birthday party, frosting on his nose, me in the background of every shot, holding it all together. I stared at those pictures for a long time, not with regret, but with clarity. I had given everything. I had sacrificed. And when I stopped being useful, I had been dismissed. So I stopped asking to be useful and started being powerful. One morning, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, hair undone, a few more lines around the eyes. But there was something else in my reflection. A woman who had taken her life back without shouting, without begging, without permission. I started walking in the mornings. Sometimes I bought flowers from the market just because. Sometimes I sat in the park and listened to the wind through the trees and felt whole. No one applauded. No one noticed. And that was the victory. A week after the sale closed, I got a letter, handwritten, from Mark. "Mom, I don't know what to say. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. We didn't think you'd disappear. Janice is furious. The kids keep asking where you are. I wish things had gone differently. But also, I know we treated you like background noise. I'm sorry. I hope you're okay. Love, Mark." There was no return address. I folded the letter once and tucked it behind the basil pot, not to forgive, just to remember. I didn't need him to understand everything. I just needed him to know. I remembered. I kept the receipts, and I walked away when my worth was no longer seen, not to punish, but to live, quietly, fully, finally. The morning they moved out, I didn't see it in person, but I heard about it. A neighbor I still exchange Christmas cards with sent a message. "They're leaving. 2 moving trucks. Mark looked like someone kicked the air out of him. You okay?" I was more than okay. I was watering my balcony herbs in a quiet apartment 4 neighborhoods away, humming an old tune I hadn't sung since Richard passed. The sky was clear. The basil was thriving. My rent was paid in full. Actually, there was no rent. I'd bought the apartment outright with part of the proceeds from the sale. That morning, I made myself toast with real butter and read the newspaper in full. Not just the headlines, not just the obits. Because when you're not living in someone else's story anymore, you get to read your own life cover to cover. They say you shouldn't hold grudges, and I don't. But I do remember. I remember the silence after being told I was a burden. I remember standing in the kitchen while laughter cut me down from the other room. I remember watching my garden die so their patio could look cleaner. And now I remember this. They are no longer in that house because I took it back. Not just the deed, not just the contract, but my place in the story. 1 week later, I saw Mark again. I was walking out of the market, my canvas tote full of lemons and chamomile and a little jar of wildflower honey. He was across the street, standing by a coffee cart. He looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen him. No Janice in sight. When he saw me, he started to cross, slowly, unsure. I kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't smile. But I didn't hide either. He caught up as I reached the corner. "Mom?" I turned, met his eyes. "Can we talk?" I paused, then nodded toward a nearby bench. "For a few minutes." We sat in silence for a while, just the city moving around us, a dog barking in the distance. Somewhere, a car alarm briefly chirped and died. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," he said. I looked at him. "That was always the problem. You thought I never would." He stared down at his coffee. "I was wrong." "Yes," I said. "You were." He rubbed his jaw. "We've been living with Janice's sister. It's temporary." I waited. "I shouldn't have said what I said," he continued. "We used you. We made you small. And I treated you like furniture." I didn't respond right away, not out of anger, but because I needed to feel whether those words actually meant something. They didn't undo the past, but they landed differently now, on steadier ground. "I don't hate you," I said. but I won't come back, and I won't pretend like it didn't happen." He nodded, slowly. "I get that." We sat for another moment. "I hope you're happy," he said. "I am," I replied. "I grow things again, I sleep, I exist on my own terms." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then he stood. "Thanks for letting me say that." I nodded once, and he walked away. Not out of my life. He'd already done that long ago, but out of my space. I went home and made a cup of tea, mint. I stood on my balcony as the sun settled low over the rooftops, painting everything in soft gold. In the distance, a violin played on someone's radio, faint but clear. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like something had finally been aired out, folded, and put away properly. No more secrets, no more silent begging to be noticed. The best kind of recognition doesn't come with applause. It comes with peace. And peace, at this age, is worth more than any apology. To the women reading this, if you've ever been told you're just in the way, if you've ever been made to feel like your years of giving were invisible, if someone you raised or cared for once made you feel like a shadow in your own story, you are not forgotten, you are not replaceable, and you are absolutely allowed to begin again, quietly, proudly, without anyone's permission. Have you ever quietly reclaimed something that was once taken from you? If you feel comfortable, share it in the comments. You never know who needs to read your story tonight.